All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, we're diving into something truly unprecedented, a U.S. military operation to capture a sitting head of state. We're going to break down exactly what happened, why the U.S. says it happened, and, what this all means for the rest of us.
Yeah, you heard that right. This is one of those headlines that sounds like it was ripped from a Hollywood blockbuster, but it's very, very real. In a lightning-fast military operation, U.S. forces went into the capital of Venezuela and took President Nicolás Maduro into custody.
So here's our game plan for this. First up, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the operation itself. Then we'll unpack the official justification from the U.S. and the, completely divided reaction it's getting. After that, we're going to zoom out to see the global shockwave. And finally, we'll look at the markets and the really dangerous precedent this whole thing might be setting.
Okay, so first things first, the big question. How did this even happen? Let's get right into the tactical details of this incredible raid in Caracas.
And here we have the official word, straight from the White House. President Trump made it super clear this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. Nope, this was a pre-planned operation, one that was apparently ready to go for 4 days, but got held up by bad weather. That tells you just how deliberate this was.
So, how'd they pull it off? It was basically a 4-step move. First, they knocked out a huge chunk of the city's power grid, which, creates all kinds of chaos and cover. Next, the forces stormed the fortified compound. The president said Maduro actually made a run for a steel-encased safety space, but, he didn't quite make it. They captured both him and his wife, Cilia Flores, and bam, they were on a flight straight to the United States.
And get this, the raid itself wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. The U.S. is keeping a force of 15,000 troops in the Caribbean to, quote, support the transition. It's a massive show of force, basically sending a crystal-clear message to Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, that there could be more to come if U.S. commands aren't met.
So that's the how. Now let's get into the why. With Maduro now in U.S. custody, we have to ask, what's the official reason? And let me tell you, it has kicked up an absolute firestorm of debate.
Okay, so this is the legal bedrock for the whole operation. The Attorney General unsealed this indictment, and it lays out 4 huge charges. We're talking everything from narco-terrorism conspiracy, basically using drugs as a weapon against the U.S., all the way to possession of machine guns. This indictment is the entire legal argument.
But, and this is a big but, is that the real story? Critics are already poking some pretty massive holes in that narco-terrorism line. I mean, they point out that fentanyl, the deadliest drug in the U.S., comes from China through Mexico. Most of our cocaine, it comes from Colombia. Venezuela, it turns out, is actually a pretty minor player, and most of what they do export goes to Europe. So it definitely raises some serious questions.
And you can see this split playing out in real time, right on the streets of the U.S. On one side, you have protesters in major cities calling this an illegal act of war. And on the other, you have members of the Venezuelan community literally celebrating in the streets, ecstatic that a leader they see as a brutal dictator is finally gone. The country is just completely torn on this.
All right, so we've got a divided nation at home. What about the rest of the planet? Let's zoom out and look at the geopolitical shockwaves this is sending around the world and even back in Washington, D.C.
The international condemnation came fast and furious, and it's all grounded in international law. Mexico's president, for instance, immediately pointed to this, Article 2 of the UN Charter. It's pretty black and white. It says you can't use force against the political independence of another country. For a lot of world leaders, this is a clear violation. End of story.
And listen, this concern isn't just coming from overseas. The pushback is happening right in Washington, and it's making for some very strange bedfellows. Just look at who is sponsoring a resolution to block further military action. You have top Democrats like Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff, right alongside Republican Rand Paul. This tells you it's not a typical partisan squabble. It's a deep debate about presidential power.
And Congressman Adam Schiff, he really puts a fine point on the biggest fear here. The worry isn't just about this single raid. It's that this action could totally destabilize the whole region and drag the United States into another long, messy, unwinnable conflict.
Okay, so we've covered the raid, the justification, the political fallout, but what about the real-world impact? We're talking money, oil, and maybe most importantly, the new rules of the game for global powers.
You might think these would send markets into a total tailspin, but the initial reaction was actually surprisingly pretty good. As the news broke, Asian markets rallied hard. At the same time, a lot of investors rushed to so-called safe haven assets like gold and silver. It seems like, for right now at least, The markets are betting on stability.
Now let's talk about the thing a lot of people are probably wondering. Is this going to hurt us at the gas pump? Well, the good news is Venezuela's key oil infrastructure wasn't damaged. But, and it's a big but, analysts are saying it would take at least a decade and tens of billions of dollars to get their oil industry back on its feet. So the bottom line is, don't expect any changes at the pump anytime soon.
But you know, market moves, that's all short-term stuff. There's a much bigger, much more sobering question we have to ask ourselves now. What kind of precedent does this set for how countries deal with each other from now on?
And this right here, this is the real kicker. This is the potential consequence that has foreign policy experts up at night. The whole U.S. justification hangs on the idea that they were just acting on a domestic indictment. Well, what's to stop a rival, like China, from doing the exact same thing? Imagine Beijing issues a domestic indictment against Taiwan's leaders and uses that as an excuse for an invasion. It creates a brand new, incredibly volatile playbook for global conflict, and that is a really chilling thought to leave you with.